Good evening, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Good evening, and thank you all for coming. My name is Bernard. I'm a bookseller here at Politics and Prose. On behalf of the owners and of the staff, I'd like to welcome all of you to this evening's event. As you may already know, Politics and Prose hosts hundreds of in-person events, along with our partnered and supported events, trips, and classes. So please check our website for a full list. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask all of you to please turn off or silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event. And when we get to the Q&A portion, I'd like to ask all of you to go to the microphone over here by the pillar before asking your questions. Tonight's event will be with Dr. John B. King Jr. in conversation with Denise Forte. They'll be talking about Dr. King's new book, Teacher by Teacher, The People Who Change Our Lives. In this inspiring memoir about teachers and the work that they do against all odds, John pays tribute not only to the many educators that have influenced his life, but also to all educators who are doing the good and essential work of teaching and inspiring students. Tonight's event is in partnership with the Education Trust, a national education civil rights organization. They have donated copies of John's books to be given to the attendees today. So please, if you'd like a copy, make your way towards our checkout counter and you can grab one from there. We would like to thank the Education Trust for their generosity. And now to introduce tonight's author and the moderator, let us all welcome Ryan Torianen, Executive Director at Teach for America's DC and Virginia region.
All right. Good evening, folks. Thank you for being here for John. I don't know how many, one of my special facts, sometimes they say, what's your special fact about yourself? And at one point I remember sharing that there is a former Secretary of Education. If he saw me on the street, he would know me by my first name, and that's John. I actually first met Secretary King in 2016 at the White House, of all places. I was the Washington Post Principal of the Year that year, and I was invited by the Obama, oh gosh, no. I was invited by the Obama administration to attend their annual celebration of educators. It's the time when they select the National Teacher of the Year. And John was so warm and smiley. He talked to me for a number of minutes. We took a photo on my cell phone. I developed that photo. I framed that photo. It was in the office when I was principal. And as it so happens, I would have other occasions where I would get to run into him or get to work with him. Several times, actually, as my current role, the Executive Director of Teach for America in DC and Virginia, he was the keynote speaker at our gala in 2022. And I even ran into him once when he was a panelist for a Teach for Michigan event. And I also went to several of his events when he was running for the Democratic nominee for the governor of Maryland. But the most memorable for me was in 2021, after I had finished my stint as a White House fellow serving the Department of Education. Of all places, I ran into him at a Safeway, the grocery store. And this was when we were all wearing masks too. So I remember seeing him in the aisle and I was like, Secretary King! And he looked a little startled. And I wonder how many people like recognized John with mask on in a supermarket before me. I don't know. I was certainly fanboying out in that moment. And I was telling him how I was about to leave the Department of Ed and I was looking for my next stint and I had a couple ideas. And he said, let me give you my email. No joke. Let me give you my personal email. And we'll set up a time and I'll do a Zoom call with you and we can discuss a little bit more about your future. And I'm just like, the former Secretary of Education just gave me his email and is gonna meet with me one-on-one on Zoom to talk about my future in educational leadership. And he did. He was so generous with his time. I think he gave me over 30 minutes. And one of the things that I talked to him about that I was thinking about pursuing was the very role that I'm in, which he encouraged me to go for. And I'm very blessed to have attained it. And when I was telling people about this time that I had with him on, seeing him in the grocery store, getting this offer, and then having that Zoom call, everyone was so surprised. They were in awe. And to be honest, when people say like, can you believe it? I remember thinking, I can't believe it. And the reason why I can't believe it is because John's a former teacher. And there is nothing more true about teachers, that you find people and you invest your whole heart into them. And they could be, and it happens with perfect strangers. When those children, the first day you meet them, you haven't even memorized their name yet, and you're ready to pour everything into them. And it carries on into adulthood and in all the people that you meet. I aspire to continue to live at that height in the way that John demonstrates, I think, each and every day. And I think that there is actually no one better than Secretary King to write a book that became a love letter to teachers, because among all the many feats that John King Jr. has attained, I know that first he is a teacher. In the same way that I say that first I am a teacher, because it was also my first job. And so I think that he is absolutely extraordinary. And so there's truly no one better to have this love letter, because he is such a shining example of what it is to be a teacher. So let me now read their official biographies before we welcome them out. Dr. John B. King Jr. served in President Barack Obama's cabinet as the 10th U.S. Secretary of Education. And over the course of his extensive and influential career in public education, he has been a high school social studies teacher, a middle school principal, the first African-American and Puerto Rican to serve as New York State Education Commissioner, a college professor, and the and the president and CEO of the Education Trust, a national education civil rights organization. Currently, Dr. King is the chancellor of the State University of New York, the nation's largest comprehensive system of public higher education. Denise Forte, who will be joining him as the moderator, is the president and CEO at the Education Trust, a national advocacy organization. As one of the country's leading voices on educational equity, Denise is on the forefront of engaging policymakers and diverse coalitions of advocates to advance progressive state and federal education legislation on behalf of students of color and students from low-income household backgrounds. Her lifetime of service includes 20 years in senior congressional staff roles on Capitol Hill and as a stint in the executive branch serving the Obama administration at the Department of Education. Please help me welcome Dr. King and Ms. Ford.
Well, hello, everybody. This is so exciting. Good to see so many of you. I'm Denise Forte, and I am, honest to goodness, just thrilled to be here tonight to be able to talk with this man who, many people say this, but John is my hero. He's one of them. He is brilliant. He is kind, and he is the leader we all should be, particularly at this time. So let me do the actual written words that I was told to say. I'm so glad we could all be together for Cinco de Mayo. The margaritas are afterwards. But perhaps a more timely week, it's Teacher Appreciation Week. And so who better to spend an evening with than John King, a teacher, a fellow dreamer like many of us in this room, and a friend. Many of you know Dr. King as the current chancellor of the State University of New York, where he leads the largest public higher education system in the country with vision, compassion, and a deep, deep belief in the power of education to change lives. Others may remember his leadership at the Department of Education as the U.S. Secretary of Education under Barack Obama, or his trailblazing work in K-12 reform. Yet many in this room, including myself, remember him as our former leader at Ed Trust, where he really pushed to expand and deepen our presence on behalf of students of color and students from low-income communities. But beyond the titles, the credentials, the accolades. John's story is one of resilience and relentless purpose, one he shares with honesty and heart in his powerful new book. And Ed Trust has some books for you, so please go get them at the register. Teacher by Teacher. It is a love story to the educators who helped shape and ultimately save his life. Much like James Baldwin in his Notes of a Native Son, John uses Teacher by Teacher to take us along his journey of self-reflection. His book is both personal and universal, reminding us of the importance of how we should all confront the painful truths from our past, not by dwelling in them, but learning from them. Baldwin captured this sentiment beautifully when he wrote, "It is only when a man is able, without bitterness or self-pity, to assess his own life that he can be said to have broken the bonds of his oppression." Tonight, we all have the privilege of hearing more about John's journey, his struggles, his growth, and the vision that continues to guide his life's work. And Ryan said this earlier. You know, John, I really do believe this book is a love letter. It's a love letter to educators, but it's also to your mother, Uncle Hal, and Aunt Jean, even Gil in all of his ways. But it's also about believing in something yourself, even when someone close to you may doubt you. It's about believing that all kids can learn, all kids deserve to learn, or as you say in the book, and I quote, "Maybe it sounds like an oxymoron, but I took happiness seriously. I didn't merely believe in it mattering. I just wanted to ensure that students knew you would do as you say." All right, let's get down to it. The book begins with the morning your mother died, with you begging to go to school. And it really illustrated for me the healing power schools and teachers can have on young people's lives. Can you talk more about your experience as a young student? And please share more about Mr. Osterweil and why going to school provided you comfort.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Denise. Thank you all for being here. That morning, November 1st, 1983, was the day that my father told me that my mother had passed away. I was 8. She had a heart attack on Halloween night, and I was in 4th grade. And in my family, my father was much older than my mother. He was 66 when I was born. And as a kid, I didn't really have very much relationship with my father. He was a pretty distant figure. We never played catch, for example. My mother was really the center of my life. And so that moment when he told me that she'd passed away, I was just crushed. There's just no words to describe what that felt like. And all I wanted was to be close to my mother. And my mother had been the guidance counselor in my elementary school. And so school and going to school every morning with her was very much a part of her. And I also wanted to be in a place that was safe. And home didn't feel safe at that moment, but school felt safe. And it felt safe because I had this amazing teacher in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, Alan Osterweil. He looped with us, which is very unusual. And in his classroom, I could be a kid. It was just a place of joy and learning. I remember the things we did in that class like it was yesterday. We read the New York Times every day, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. Like the real kind, you know, the kind you open on paper. We did productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare in elementary school. We did a production of Alice in Wonderland. I was the rose with big red felt petals sticking out of my head. We went on incredible field trips to the Museum of Natural History and the ballet and the aquarium and the cloisters. And he was always sort of helping us discover the world. And I felt safe in his classroom. I felt challenged, engaged, nurtured. And if not for having Mr. Oswald as my teacher, I don't know that I'd be alive today. My father had Alzheimer's, and nobody knew. It was just the two of us. And so over that period, from when my mom passed when I was 8 till when my dad passed when I was 12, home got more and more unstable and unpredictable. I didn't know if my father would talk to me from one night to the next, if he'd be sad or angry or violent. But school was a place that was consistent and supportive. And when I started this book tour, obviously I talk a lot about Mr. Oswald in the book, and when I started this book tour last week at the 92nd Street Y, Mr. Oswald was there for the kickoff event. And so really, I am the number one fan of Teacher Appreciation Week, because if not for teachers, I wouldn't be here.
That's so great, and I'm so glad he came to see you. That's awesome. You know, as you progress through your school years, I think people will be shocked to hear and shocked to read that Dr. John B. King Jr. was actually expelled from high school. What did that experience teach you? And also, there was an important lesson that your dear Uncle Hal shared with you at that time.
Yeah. So after my dad passed, I moved around different family members, different schools. I lived with my older brother, who was just 12 years older than me, and had no business having a 12-year-old to raise. He loved me, but it was not a good situation. And so I came up with the strategy that I would get out of that situation by going to boarding school. And I had a friend from elementary school who'd gone to Groton, and he had good things to say about it. And so I had this idea that I could have more stability. My brother drank a lot. Home was very chaotic. I thought, okay, I'll go to boarding school. It'd be great. And so I went to Phillips Academy, Phillips Andover. Bobby Edwards, who's right there, admitted me to Andover. And in some ways, it was an amazing experience. The resources there, the academic experience there. But I also was very out of place. As a kid from Brooklyn, there were fewer than today students of color. There were a lot of tensions around race and class. And I felt very alone there. And I was also really angry. I was angry at adults. I was angry at the experiences I'd had as a kid. Even in a way, angry at my parents, even though that's irrational. I just was mad about what I had experienced. And I was also going through a period of increasing awareness of race and class and how they function in society. And like many adolescents, was sort of discovering my own frustration with how our society is organized. And Andover was a tough place to do that. And there were a lot of rules. And I had been on my own since I was 8 and taking care of myself. And so I didn't really like following the rules. So I didn't follow any of the rules. And I got in a lot of trouble. And at that time, and I think it's better now, but at that time, there really weren't systems for a kid who was doing well academically, but struggling socioemotionally. Now, if you were a very wealthy kid and you grew marijuana with a glow light or whatever in your closet, there was a system for that. And that turned out okay for you. But there was not a system for the kind of struggles that I was going through. And so I got kicked out. And I went to live with my aunt and uncle. My Uncle Hal, who was my father's youngest brother. He was a Tuskegee Airman. And he had this just extraordinary life. Growing up in a deeply segregated New York City, chose to go to Tuskegee, Alabama, to be trained as a pilot. Would tell the story of the Tuskegee Airmen having to check their fuel tanks to see if the white pilots had poured water into the fuel tank, because people did not want black pilots to be successful. They did not want to see that black people could fly. He served in World War II. He came back from World War II, was trained as an accountant, couldn't get a job as an accountant as a black man, and so decided to become a firefighter. I always find that so extraordinary, that society, despite his service, discriminated against him, and his reaction was, I know what I'll do. I'll go run into burning buildings to save people's lives. Right? But he had this faith in America, what America could be, and he had this incredible will to persevere. And so he sat me down after I got kicked out, and I told him that my plan was I wanted to go back to Andover, because even though they kicked me out, they said, maybe if you get it together over the next year, you could come back and do a postgraduate year. And I was like, well, I got to do that. I got to fix this. And my uncle sat me down, and he said, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to go to high school here and live with me and Aunt Jean. You're going to graduate from high school here, and you're going to go to college. And I said, I don't want to do that. I want to fix this thing. And he cut me off, and he said, and it really changed my life. He said to me, neither you nor I can do anything about the things that have happened to you as a kid and so far in your life. But you have to decide at this moment what kind of man you want to be, what kind of life you want to have. And hearing that from him, given the life that he had led, had a huge impact on me and gave me this sense that I wasn't going to be stuck in the past, that I needed to have a path forward. And it really shaped my whole trajectory, and I was very grateful. He also ran a tight ship in his house. Uncle Hal and Aunt Jean had dinner at the same time every night. There was a lot of structure, and I needed that because I hadn't had that since I was very little.
Yeah, I really marveled at the stories of Uncle Hal and Aunt Jean, and could see you all. Honestly, you painted such a beautiful picture. Being an educator comes with extraordinary responsibility, but also the possibility of lifting young people up and changing the trajectory of their lives. How can parents and other parties concerned, other family members, community members, really support the teachers in their lives? What kinds of questions would parents, guardians, what should they be asking at the teacher-parent conferences? What advice do you have for them?
A couple things. One is I've really tried in my career to think about the experience I had in Mr. Osterwild's classroom and how we do that for all kids. How do we create spaces that are safe and supportive and nurturing and challenging and rigorous and engaging? And I think that's what we should be looking for in school. When I was a principal, I used to say to teachers, on the first day of school, I want kids to get off the bus, and I want them to say, Ms. Forte's class is going to be amazing this year. Right? We're going to read these incredible books. Or, Ms. Forte's class is going to be amazing. We did this experiment today, and we put liquid in, and it changed color, and then we put different liquid in, and changed colors again, and it's going to be great. Instead of, it's the first day of class, we read through the syllabus, we heard about all the assignments for the semester, right? It's that opportunity to spark joy and passion in learning. And that is, I think, what we should be looking for and trying to understand, what's my child excited about? What experiences are they having in school that they're most excited about, that they're most interested in? What are they most curious about? And we ought to be supporting teachers in creating those kinds of spaces. That means we have to pay teachers more. Right?
Amen.
That means we have to make the working conditions for teachers better. I think about those field trips in Mr. Osterwild's class. In many schools today, there's not really a field trip budget. And so kids aren't having those kinds of experiences. I think about, not just the building, whether the copier is working, although it should, right? But also, are there enough counselors? When you're a teacher and you've got a class of 25 students and 20 or more of them are going through a thing. There's food insecurity, housing insecurity, domestic violence, violence in the community. And kids are coming with all those needs, and you've got 25 kids, and there's one counselor for every 500 students in your school. That's untenable. That's a working conditions problem that we should fix. And then I think, this week there'll be a lot of Starbucks cards given, right? And a lot of shiny apples brought to school. But folks need to not just appreciate teachers, they need to vote like they appreciate
Amen.
Teachers.
Oh, yeah. I know from past experience that John King loves himself a graduation. Um, as we sent him across the country many times, loved himself a graduation. And we're coming up on that season right now. Tell us why graduations are such an amazing part of your job, because you still do them. You speak at all of your SUNY schools. And where do you think the best graduations are happening right now, and what do they really mean for kids when you can do it the right way?
So I do love graduations. It's such a celebration of accomplishment, right? For the students, for the faculty, for the school community. It's a celebration of what we've done, what we've built. It's a celebration of the transformative power of education, right? Students are changed by the experience, whether you're coming to the end of pre-K and you're about to go to kindergarten and you're changed by that, and maybe you run out of the line and give grandpa a hug before you go up to get your diploma, or you're a college graduate and you're figuring out where's this going to lead and what's my career and what's my future. But my favorite graduations, and I talk about this in the book, are the graduations in prisons. And that is because you see there so powerfully the transformative power of education. And there are a bunch of folks here who worked with me in the Obama administration. One of the things I'm most proud of from my time in the Obama administration was working on an initiative called Second Chance Pell. And it was part of the My Brother's Keeper initiative, which Michael Smith right here ran. And President Obama launched My Brother's Keeper to focus on boys and young men of color, with the thought that if we could address the needs of boys and young men of color who so often are underserved, we could actually make things better for everybody. And one of the initiatives we launched under My Brother's Keeper was Second Chance Pell, to try to restore access to Pell Grants for folks who are incarcerated. And this was because in the mid-90s, in the 94 crime bill, Congress, no offense to those who have worked on Capitol Hill, Congress stupidly banned access to Pell Grants for folks who are incarcerated. It's dumb public policy because 95% of the people who are incarcerated are coming home. So it's in everybody's interest, theirs, the community, ours, for them to come home, the folks to come home better prepared to be successful when they get home. Congress banned access to Pell Grants. Programs closed overnight. This is an issue we worked on at Ed Trust. I remember talking to one woman who was incarcerated in a prison at that time. The guards came and took the books from the library and said, "You won't need these anymore." And it was that mood of the mid-90s, this tough on crime, mass incarceration mood. So we wanted to restore access to Pell Grants. We couldn't get Congress all the way there. It's an understatement. But we used our experimental authority under the Higher Education Act to launch a pilot project, 65 colleges and universities where folks could use Pell Grants to pursue higher education. And we use that as a demonstration and then try and persuade members of Congress, governors, legislators to change the law. And thankfully, the law has been changed, and now Pell Grant access has been restored for all incarcerated students. But at those graduations, you see folks who are so changed by having access to education. And for many, we called it Second Chance Pell, but for many folks, it's the first chance. They never had that kind of relationship with a faculty member. They never had that kind of attention to their educational needs. They never had those kinds of discussions about John Locke, these powerful conversations that they have in class. And they're transformed by it, and their relationship with their family and friends is transformed. I remember one guy I met at Sing Sing telling me, this higher education in prison is the first time I've had academic and moral credibility with my family. And you see it in the faces of the partners and the kids and the parents who are there to celebrate with them, because they know they're going to have a totally different life as a result of the higher education they've received. But also, they're becoming renewed through this educational journey. And I just love those. The guy who told me that at Sing Sing now works for me. We are the largest provider of higher education in prison in New York at SUNY. And I'm just committed that we need to just make education possible for everybody.
And we thank you for that. And we at Trust are trying to carry on a lot of that work with our Justice Fellows. Let's get a little bit more current. I don't know if anybody has heard this before, but there's this small 900-page book called Project 2025. And in one of the chapters of that 900-page book, it calls for dismantling the Department of Education. I think you might have some thoughts about that, John.
Look, it's incredibly distressing, painful, and terrifying. Distressing and painful because I know the people, because we worked with them. Just wonderful civil servants, people who were themselves teachers and principals and student affairs administrators in higher education, and they've committed years of their lives to working at the department so that they can help kids and schools and communities, and they've been treated horribly. It's terrifying because the department has such an important role. Now, there are 4 core functions of the department. 1, get resources to vulnerable kids. The Title I program that sends money to schools serving low-income students. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding, which allows for students with disabilities to get the services they need. That funding is in jeopardy. It's in jeopardy because the people who administer those programs are no longer there. There are half as many people working at the department today as there were on January 20th. And it's also in jeopardy because I think the administration's clear agenda is to cut these vital programs. The second major function is our federal financial aid system. Nearly half our entering students at SUNY are Pell Grant students. Right? Pell Grants have made it possible for generations of Americans to access higher education. The entry point to that is the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. If that breaks, it's a disaster for higher education, but more than that, it's a disaster for our economy, for our national security, for the health of our democracy. The student loan system makes it possible for low and middle income Americans to access higher education. That too starts with the FAFSA. So I'm very worried about that system breaking. And they say it'll all be fine, but they've laid off, again, so many of the people who worked on the FAFSA and on the federal student aid system. The third area of work for the department is civil rights enforcement. And I always remind people of the Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges, right? And you can picture it almost immediately, right? It's such an iconic painting. And in the center, of course, is Ruby Bridges, but who's around her? U.S. Marshals. Why are U.S. Marshals around her? Because New Orleans and Louisiana did not want to respect her civil rights, did not want to deliver a quality education to her. Right? That took federal intervention. And so when you take away the people who do civil rights enforcement, that means if you're a victim of discrimination on the basis of race or sex or disability, you won't have someplace to go. They received over 20,000 complaints last year, a significant number of them from families of kids who aren't getting the disability services they're entitled to. Where will they go? Then the fourth area of work for the department, I know this is a passion for you, Denise, and for Ed Trust, data, research, information. How can we fix things if we don't know how we're doing? And it's the department's job to give us that information, things like the National Assessment of Educational Progress that we use to understand how we're doing. And also, it's how we know where we're doing well, so we can go replicate those things. So all of that is under threat. And when you combine the layoffs at the department, the grants that have been canceled, and you combine that with the budget proposals from the administration, what you see is really an assault on K-12, on higher education, on the idea that education should be a national imperative. And I think that is very dangerous.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, John. I'm going to get one more question in, and then we want to open it up to you all. I know that there are some really burning questions for John. John, you've been involved in education at every conceivable level. Based on that, as a teacher, as a school leader, as the head of the state, as the deputy secretary, as the U.S. secretary, now as chancellor, head of Ed Trust, what do you see? Tell us, what are, in your mind, what are the keys to success? How would you define student success? It doesn't just come down to grades and testing. It's about other things as well, as a well-balanced student who does academically. But share with us your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think about this a lot in my current job and have throughout my career. I hope that we equip all of our students with the skills to thrive, right? And that's the skills to be successful at the next level, right? If you're a middle school teacher, you want your student to be prepared to be successful in high school. If you're a high school teacher, you want them to be prepared to be successful in college or careers. But we want more than just skills, right? We also want them to be prepared to be good citizens. And we're counting on young people to inherit our democracy and keep it going, which feels more fragile now than it has maybe in many decades. So we need them to be prepared to disagree agreeably, to listen, not just to wait your turn so you can say what you think, but actually to hear the other person and to think through, what's motivating them. We need them to have empathy. We need them to understand current events and also to be invested in community. Right? Those are things that we can cultivate in schools from K-12 through higher education. We also want to prepare our students to live fulfilling lives. The same things we think about as parents, right? We want our kids to be happy. We want them to have an appreciation for the arts and music. We want them to have an appreciation for the outdoors and nature, and a reason to think we ought to keep this, planet of ours going a little longer, right? So there's so much that we want for our students, and I hope that we all want for other people's children what we would want for our own. And one of the things that worries me with these attacks on public education is I fear that underlying it is a sense that people are less worried about other people's children, that that's something others need, and they're going to only look out for their own. And that is very dangerous, because you cannot build walls high enough around your Tesla-funded mansion to separate the future of your children from the future of the children down the road, down the street, in the next town over, on the Native American reservation, in Puerto Rico, right? Like, all of our children's fates are all bound up together. And so we all have a stake in ensuring a great education for every child.
Amen. John, as a point of personal privilege, I'm going to ask a question on behalf of Lloyd Horwich, who is listening to this in Chicago right now. He read the book and he loved it, but he was also fascinated by the number of times in the book that you would say this person that you were in contact with would be played by Anne Hathaway, or someone else would be played by another actress or another actor. And so Lloyd wanted to know, who would play you in your book? John David Washington, Michael B. Jordan. Who you got for us, John?
I used to say Will Smith, but now can't say that anymore. Nope. Can't say that anymore. I don't know. I'm gonna have to ponder that. I will say this: my daughter is graduating from NYU in a week from the Tisch School. She's going to be a professional actress. So if there is a movie, she should play my wife, Melissa, who's right there.
Awesome. Friends, questions for John? We have one in the back. Am I supposed to? Oh, no, you're supposed to come up to the microphone. There's one over here. You go ahead. Can you tell us who you are?
Thank you so much to both of you for being here today. My name is Nathan Weissler, and I'm a 2021 graduate of Montgomery College here in the Washington, D.C. area. In your book, I especially found it meaningful reading about the field trips with Mr. Osterwilde and the memorable conversations in Ms. D's class. And largely drawing from my own experiences, I have done a lot of I have done extensive advocacy work for a long time for acceptance and inclusion for individuals and students who have special needs. I've done writing and speaking on the topic in different settings, including some school settings. And I'm seriously considering working in the field of education to try to make a long-term difference in the areas of inclusion and acceptance. And I've spoken to both students and adults on the topic. And my question is, what do you think are some of the most important achievements in the last 50 years in the areas of inclusion and acceptance in the field of education? And what do you think are some of the most important things to be accomplished, that remain to be accomplished in the next 50 years?
Wow, we start with a softball question. I really do hope that you choose education, and we need you, and we need to work on inclusion. Can we have a round of applause for you? Thank you. Look, I think what the United States has done to expand opportunity for students with disabilities over the last 50 years is one of the great achievements of the United States as a country. Right? We, before other countries around the world have committed, because of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we've committed resources to make it possible for folks to have access, and we've created a civil rights infrastructure so that when folks aren't included, there is a place to go to try to vindicate their rights. And I worry all of that is in jeopardy now because of the actions of the current administration. I think we have gotten better at understanding diverse needs that students bring. And I think about the progress we've made around addressing the needs of dyslexic students and the progress we're making nationally to try to make reading instruction more responsive to the needs of dyslexic students. I think about the progress we've made in understanding autism and how to serve students with autism, ADHD and neurodiversity more broadly. And so that too, some of that progress is also under threat, right? Some of how we've made that progress is the funding of research and technical assistance centers through the U.S. Education Department. All of that is either already eliminated or at risk of being eliminated. But we still have a long way to go. And when you look at the data, for example, on high school graduation for students with disabilities, we have a long way to go. When you look at college matriculation and completion, proud of you for going to Montgomery College. It's something we're working on at SUNY to get better as a higher education system at making sure that we have the supports in place for students with disabilities to thrive. So my hope is over the next 50 years, we will get even better at inclusion and that folks can have confidence that their child, whatever disability they may have, when they come to school, that they're going to be educators prepared and trained to support their needs and that the resources will be there to help them to thrive. But that's going to take resolve on the part of the country to say we're not going to leave anyone behind. And I fear that, again, this message from the administration is counter to that goal of mobilizing all of us to ensure that everyone has opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service to public education. I want to ask you about something that has me very concerned, and I want to hear what you think is going to happen. Last year, the Republican majority legislature in North Carolina increased funding for school vouchers by $436 million. Their goal is to get the funding for vouchers, private school vouchers, to $830 million. It is legal in North Carolina to use those vouchers for public schools that discriminate against LGBTQ status, disability status, religion. They can teach creationism, anti-LGBTQ values. What are your thoughts with the attack on public education, the Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights? Where are we headed, and what can we do?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for your service on the school board in Montgomery County. We appreciate it. Look, I think there's an agenda to expand vouchers. When Betsy DeVos was secretary during the first Trump term, that was sort of her singular focus, the singular thing she was in, is to foster the growth of vouchers. And you look at what you're describing in North Carolina, similar story in Florida, similar story in Indiana. Texas now will be moving towards large-scale voucher system. And it's dangerous for a number of reasons. One, for all the reasons you described about the tolerance for discrimination in voucher schools. It is, I think, also dangerous because in many communities, there really aren't private school options. So for many rural communities, this is just about losing resources. Their schools will get less, and there will be no vouchers for them. The vouchers will be in other parts of the state. Their schools will just have less. And that will quickly mean teacher layoffs, larger class sizes, fewer AP classes, fewer foreign language classes, and so forth. In other places, you will see predatory, for-profit voucher schools emerge. And one of the things that we worked on in the Obama administration was cracking down on predatory for-profit colleges because they are scams trying to steal students' student loan money, their GI Bill money, and we will see something very similar in the voucher world. You will see these predatory for-profit institutions emerge. They will not provide a quality education. They will vacuum up those voucher dollars, and it will be for the profit of their owners or their shareholders and not for the public good. And in the end, our democracy will be weaker for this voucher system. We will have less shared understandings of our history, and we will have less shared understandings of our future. And so I'm very worried, and I think people are not yet hair on fire in the way they should be about this. Too few people understand how quickly the voucher movement is expanding and how much money is already being directed away from public schools to vouchers. And if we don't start organizing parents, organizing faith leaders, organizing the civil rights community on this issue, the momentum will continue to grow, and we will turn around and we will have lost the public education foundation for the long-term health of our democracy.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. King. As a former RPC student and teacher, and now about to be a graduate, I have a couple teacher education peers with me. We would like to know what's your advice to future teacher educators, especially coming out of traditional teacher ed?
It's so hard to look at Lindsay and not see the sixth grader who was my student.
My mom says hi, and Leah also does.
Tell them I said hi. Congratulations on all you've accomplished. A couple of things. One is, I think, and this is one of my hopes with the book, is we have to keep reminding prospective teachers and early career teachers of the impact that they can have over time. I always say to people sometimes ask me, like, what's the hardest job you've had? By far, first year of teaching was the hardest job that I've ever had. Right? It's incredibly difficult. You don't have files to go back to. Everything is the first time you're doing it. Mm-hmm. You're every night you're puzzling over the kid that you didn't connect with, or the thing that went wrong in class, or the thing that went wrong about the lesson plan, right? And so you need that sense of this is all going to pay off one day. Mm-hmm. And when you've been teaching, 25, 30 years, you have your former students and you can see the impact that you've had. But when you are a first year teacher, you can't see that. And so I think part of it is helping students to see that the path that the career can take. Second, I would say, is helping students see great teaching. I think one of the challenges is you can't really get good teaching just from a textbook or even from learning by doing. You actually have to see and watch and debrief phenomenal teaching. You can do that with video, you can do that with being in the back of a classroom, but we have to find more ways to get teachers, prospective teachers, to spend time watching outstanding teachers. The last thing I would say is, and this is a resource constraint, I know this is hard for any institution to do on its own, but we're certainly trying at SUNY. We need to move towards more residency type experiences where folks are spending, right, extended time in school. You know, student teaching is too short, it's not enough time, and students lose out. I recall when I was secretary, I visited Louisiana to visit a teacher residency program, and one of the teachers said the most profound thing. He'd graduated from the teacher residency program. He was a first-year teacher. And he said, I'm having so much better a school year than my classmates because I did a residency and I knew what September was supposed to look like, right? And who in this room has taught elementary school, right? You would all agree, I think, that the whole game comes down to like September and October, right? You got to get those routines and structures right. And this teacher was reflecting on, because he did a residency, he saw his mentor teacher create those routines and structures. And his classmates who did student teaching, who popped in for a few visits in the fall and then a few weeks in the spring, never saw that. And so they were sitting around by November regretting the things that they hadn't put in place in September and October and starting to worry about, well, how can I do it better next year? Whereas he had a vision for what it was supposed to look like. So I think we should move towards more of a residency model. I'm so proud of you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Hey, y'all. I'm Emily Griswold, former public school teacher in DC for 10 years. So shout out to the new teachers and somebody who wants to be a teacher. Please become a teacher. My question really is about school culture, especially as we're talking about the funding that's being cut and some of the issues that we see specifically in public schools with the relationship between teachers and principals. I'm wondering if you have any kind of words of wisdom around how to create sustainable school cultures to retain teachers and principals in a place where they're connected and get along and are working toward the common good of what we want to see change in public schools, especially as resources are being pulled and more attacks are coming toward them.
Yeah. It's so hard because, especially in schools that are strapped for resources, I think administrators are themselves frustrated that they can't do more to support their teachers and to address working conditions issues. But I do think there are some cultural things that you can cultivate as a school leader that are really important. And I described some of this in the book in describing some of the things we tried to do in the school where Lindsay was a student, where I was a principal. We set aside 3.5 weeks in the summer for teachers to come back early to do planning and professional development as a team. Now, that's a big commitment of time. People love their summers. But what it meant was that rather than starting, after just a day preparing for class, you had this time as a team to think through what the school year was going to look like, to look at student work together, and made a huge difference. We also had a time with new teachers to get them oriented to the school culture and so forth. We had an extended school day, but we actually ended our school day at the same time as the local schools on Fridays, so that we would have 2.5 hours every Friday for dedicated professional development time. And we used that time to work in teams, to talk on grade level teams, to talk about students who were struggling and what they needed. We used that time to work in departments, to look at student work together, to look at video of instruction, to just get better at our work. And we used that time as a faculty when we gathered for folks to talk about what we could improve as a school community. And that dedicated time to the practice of improving our teaching, I think, helped us build a culture where the teachers and the school leaders and the administrators, we all were in it together to try to make the school as joyful a place as possible for our students and as effective for our students as possible. The other thing we did was lots of culture building that was just fun. Now, my wife may have some skepticism about this, but many of our first dates involved school field trips. And it was a good thing, right? But we would take students to, because of my experiences in Mr. Oswald's class, we would take students to concerts and to baseball games. We took the kids on the honor roll on a ski trip. And that was a chance for teachers and students to be together celebrating community. And it also helped build the relationship between teachers and students, and between teachers and parents as well. And it meant lots of dates for Melissa and me, and it must have worked because one of the stories I tell in the book is proposing to Melissa. She'd been on so many school field trips with me. And I was in Boston and she was in New York. She was teaching in Harlem. And I told her to meet me at the Metropolitan Museum of Art because I was going to be with my students. And she could just ride back in the van with us. And I can't believe she said yes, but she did. And she met me at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And that's one of the places we'd gone on one of our early dates. And we went to the sculpture garden there. And I proposed to her. And then after I proposed, she was looking around like, where are the students? And are we going to go with the students back? Fortunately, there was not actually a school field trip. And that was not our next activity. But it was an illustration that we just tried to build a culture in the school of deep community.
Thank you.
Just going to ask my friends at Politics and Prose whether we have time for another question. One more question. Great.
Gosh, okay, pressure's on. Thank you. My name's Julia. I'm not an educator. I'm not a teacher. I'm just a product of public school in Michigan, and boy, was I lucky. I'm also one of these overeducated single women in DC with no kids. So I just wanted to say to all of you, thank you so much for teaching the children here. And I am so concerned about what's happening with the dismantling of the education department and the government. And my background's in policy. And what I really struggle with is, do you have any advice for, obviously you are all educators, we have to do better, I think, in helping some of the other adults learn about how to critically analyze information. Do you have any ideas for how we might be able to do that? I mean, you're all teachers, you're all the brightest people that I can see around. I mean, what are we going to do? We have to help our country somehow get back to a place where not only do we respect education and we're putting our tax dollars where they should go. I mean, everyone I know is screaming, put the money back, give the things back, make the agencies work. I'm just so worried. It's not a very thoughtful question. I'm very sorry. I'm just trying to put my arms around this idea that the people I know keep telling me, I'm doing my own research. And I'm like, you don't have a lab. What are you talking about? And they don't know how to critically take apart the information that they are reading, and it's not necessarily their fault. I don't know that they have the skills or that they perhaps didn't learn them along the way, and people are having a really hard time separating their opinion from fact. What is the advice you might have for the things that would fall into what would be continuing lifelong education, and how do we help adults start to really get back to that place where then we can turn this thing around and maybe everybody in this room gets everything that they need and more, right? That's what I want for us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I love that question.
Thank you all for your work, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. I love that question. I'll start with saying one thing we should not be doing is getting rid of PBS and NPR, right? Like that's the opposite. Look, a couple things. One is I think we have to get better at conversation across lines of difference. And as angry as I am about so many things that are happening now, I know that part of the path forward has to be talking with people who have different perspectives and helping to shift their perspectives. And we don't have enough places where we do that. My brother-in-law is involved in an effort to do deep canvassing, which is really about spending time knocking on doors to talk with people, not necessarily just to persuade them about a specific vote or a specific policy, but to build relationship and to try to understand what are concerns for them and to share why you're passionate about the issues you're passionate about. We need to do that in more places, whether it's in churches or in schools or in neighborhoods or in community events. We just have to find ways to help bridge differences. And I'll tell one quick story about that in a second. The other thing I would say long term, I think social media has been very detrimental to the health of our democracy, very detrimental. And one thing, it's a small policy thing, but I think very promising. Our governor in New York, Governor Hochul, is hopefully in the next couple of days going to secure a budget agreement that will include a bell-to-bell ban on cell phones in K-12 schools. I think this is very important because it is very unhealthy to have young people spending 6, 7, 8 hours a day on social media. They are getting sucked into their phone. I think it's a driver of depression and anxiety, and it's undermining not only learning critical thinking and academic skills, just it's undermining childhood. You know, when you walk into a cafeteria in a K-12 school and you see all the students not talking to each other but looking down at a device, that's dystopian, right? We should not. And so I do think there are some policy things we need to do over the long term to try to protect the health of our democracy. One final story about learning across difference that I share in the book. I've had the experience over the last few years of building a relationship with the family who are direct line descendants of the family that enslaved my family. And the way that we got to know them, I was asked to give a speech when I was secretary at University of Maryland Eastern Shore. My grandmother graduated in 1894. And to prepare for the speech, I decided I would do some family research so that I could, contextualize my grandmother's story. And I worked with a friend of a friend who was a researcher at the Schomburg, the part of the New York City Public Library that works on African American history. She sends an email to me one night. I'm with my family, we're watching TV. We get this email that says, I found the place where your great-grandfather was enslaved. We were living in Silver Spring. This place was in Gaithersburg, Maryland, about 25 miles from where we lived. I found the place. It's still owned by the family who are direct line descendants of the family that enslaved your family. And the cabin that they lived in, that my family lived in, my great-grandfather lived in as an enslaved person, is still standing on the property. So we had this fascinating family conversation. What do you do now? Do you call ahead? Do you send an email? Like, how do you start this conversation? My cousin just went and knocked on the door and said, hello, our family was enslaved here. And it sparked this incredible journey in our relationship with this family, the Beckers. And I've learned so much about it in speaking across lines of difference. Even though they grew up amidst the artifacts of slavery, they had not really spent that much time thinking about the institution of slavery. The cabin was not 30 feet from the main house, which was built in the 1700s. They called the cabin the quarters, right? But they hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about what slavery meant. I remember one conversation we had where they said to us, we hope our family wasn't cruel to your family. And I knew what they meant. I knew that they meant that they hoped that their family didn't torture our family. But I said to them, no, they were cruel because slavery is cruel. They did torture them because owning people is torture. And to their credit, they have been incredibly open to the conversation. And through our relationship, they and we have come to a different understanding of our shared, very complicated past. And for example, they cleaned out the cabin, which they were using as a storage shed, to sort of see it now as preserving history. There are 2 burial grounds on the property. There's one that has very fancy headstones, including honoring their ancestors who served in the Confederacy, as many Marylanders did. And then there's an unmarked burial ground where my ancestors are buried. Well, they are now doing work with folks who do burial ground research to find where my ancestors were exactly buried so that we can put markers there, right? And that journey of relationship building, that is what we need to do a lot more of as a country. And it means that we have to reckon with the reality of the hard parts of our history. And when you're standing inside of that cabin, 30 feet from the main house, you're very conscious of the fact that these were 2 families living in the same physical space, one owning the other. But it also means that we have to celebrate the progress that we've made. how profound it is that my family went in 3 generations from enslaved in that cabin to serving in the cabinet of the first Black president. That's the American story, and we have to find ways to engage all of our fellow citizens, even the ones who are resistant, in that conversation to try to find a path forward.
Thank you, John. Just so incredible. I know that many of you in this room, like myself, are experiencing great joy learning more about you. Please get this book, Teacher by Teacher. We have some up at the register. John's going to be signing books, and I am so glad all of you are here to learn more about John. He's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise.